Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. We've been in this education series, and if you've been listening, we've talked about a couple things already. We've talked about, education being a journey. That was where I started this. We talked about tax credits. We talked about tax deductions. Today, we're going to jump and talk about student loans. And when I first started looking into this, and I got to give my new admin, Taylor, some credit on this. She did a lot of the research for this series on education. I first started looking into this, it took me some time to think about, okay, well, what do we really need to concern ourselves with, and I look at it from the standpoint of not only being an accounting professional, but being a parent. I remember my oldest son went through this process and I really didn't know a lot about it. So I hope that this education series will really be something that's beneficial. So the first thing I want to talk about when we talk about student loans is the difference between private and federal loans. And a lot of people don't understand this, but there really are two distinct things. And that is a federal student loan, and this makes perfect sense. These loans are funded by the federal government. Then there are private student loans. These loans are non-federal loans made by a lender such as a bank, credit union, state agency, or a school. Now, if you need to borrow money to pay for college or a career, start with federal student loans. And I'll tell you, once we get into the discussion of that, we'll get into a little bit of the nuances of that, because at the federal student loan level, we also have to discuss subsidized loans versus unsubsidized loans. We're going to talk about direct plus loans and federal Perkins loans. Now, let's start off, at the top level of this. What's the difference between a federal and the private student loans? Now, the thing you will know, and that's what they talk about, start with the federal student loans, is federal student loans include many benefits, most of which is a fixed interest rates and income-driven repayment plans. This is not typically offered by private loans. Now, the thing you'll know about private loans is they're generally more expensive. Now, there is a chart that was provided by studentaid.ed.gov, and I definitely recommend that as a great resource, where they talk about some of the differences between federal student loans and private student loans. So let's jump into that. Now, with a federal student loan, you will not have to start repaying your federal student loans until you graduate, leave school, or change your enrollment status to less than full time. As compared to that, a private student loan, many private student loans require payment while you're still in school. So there's a big difference there, is that you don't have to pay while you're still in school. Now, on the federal student loan side, the interest rate is fixed and is often lower than private loans and much lower than some credit card interest rates. Now, you can go online and check out the current federal student loans rates. Now, on the private student loan side, private student loans can have variable interest rates, some greater than 18%. This is kind of like a credit card, folks. A variable rate may substantially increase the total amount you repay. Now, on the federal side, undergraduate students with financial need will likely qualify for a subsidized loan where the government pays the interest while you're in school on at least half-time basis. Now, private student loans are not at all subsidized. No one pays the interest on your loan except for you. Now, for a federal student loan, you don't need to get a credit check for most federal student loans except plus loans, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. The federal student loans can help you establish a good credit record as well. Now, on the private side, private student loans may require an established credit record. The cost of a private student loan will depend on your credit score and other factors. Again, this is just like any other personal loan or credit card loan that you may be looking to get. Now, on the federal side, you won't need a cosigner to get a federal student loan in most cases, whereas with a private student loan, you may need to find that cosigner because they're looking at your credit. They're looking at your income to see whether you're going to qualify for this. Now, from a tax deductibility standpoint, interest on federal student loans may be tax deductible, whereas interest on private student loans may not be tax deductible. We're not going to talk a lot about that. We're just going to put that on the list and say that's a possibility here. Now, on the federal student loans, loans can be consolidated into a direct consolidation loan. And we may not talk a lot about consolidation loans, that we may save that for another session down the road. Now, private student loans cannot be consolidated into a direct consolidation loan. What that really means is that if you consolidate your loans, rather than making separate payments for each of the loans, you can combine these loans into a single loan and just make a single payment. Now, On the federal side, if you're having trouble repaying your loan, you may be able to temporarily postpone or lower your payments. Now, a lot of people will know what this term is. If you've been through college and gotten into the repayment, it's called forbearance. And what that does is the federal student loans have excellent forbearance programs where, let's say that you lose your job, or let's say that you have some kind of, medical issue or some reason you can't pay your loans, you can actually go into forbearance. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about forbearance because the interest does still accrue, but it doesn't wreck your credit. It doesn't show that you're not paying your loans, but the numbers still go up though. Now, on the private student loans, they may not offer forbearance or deferment options. You may just be like, look, you need to pay this. There's not an option. Now, on the federal student loan side, there are several repayment plans, including an option to tie your monthly payments to your income. So you can actually work with the federal student loan folks and say, listen, I'm going to, base my payments on my income. And that may be really helpful. Let's say that you have a downturn in your job, or let's say, something happens that you can't afford to make the payments based on your new level of income. That's something that you can work with on the federal student loan side. Now, again, on the private student loan side, you're going to have to work with the lender and see what they're willing to do. There may not be any forbearance, or there may not be any income-based limitations that they can work with you to get those payments down. Now, from a prepayment fee perspective, there are no prepayment fees on the federal student loans. If you want to go ahead and pay them, you can pay them. In fact, my oldest son, he joined the Coast Guard. He did a year in college, and now he's actually in the Coast Guard, and he's already paid off his student loans. He said, Dad, it's not something I want to saddle myself with moving forward. So he could have easily gone into forbearance, but he has already paid them off, and there was no prepayment penalty for doing that. Now, on the private student loan side, this is a question you have to ask if you're going to take the private student loan approach. There may be prepayment penalties. Prepayment penalty basically means that if you don't keep the loan for the length of the time that you sign for, they can charge you a fee for paying it off early. And that you just have to look at the individual loan to determine if that's something that would affect you. And then finally, on the federal student loan side, you may be eligible to have some portion of your loans forgiven if you work in public service. There's things called the loan forgiveness programs. And I'm not going to talk about those on the show, but it's something you can go online and check out. Now, from a private loans perspective, it's unlikely that your lender will offer any loan forgiveness program. Listen, these folks that do these private student loans, they are in the business of lending money. They are not in the business of education. They're in the business of lending money. So think about it along terms of, this is a private loan. It's going to cost you more. It's a private loan. The interest rates are going to be higher. It's not going to be subsidized. You're going to be paying the interest on this. You're not going to get any subsidy for that. They may require you to have good credit or established credit and income. You might need a cosigner. The interest that you're paying may not be tax deductible. They can't be consolidated. They may not offer forbearance or deferment options. These are all things you've got to check with your lender and find out the specifics of. Now, in our next session, we're going to dive into deeper up to the federal student loan programs and get into some eligibility requirements. So make sure you tune in for the next one.
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening, and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware, and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.